But maybe you can tell us a little about yourself. Welcome to Whiskytower TV, and tell us a little about yourself. And you have lived in Sweden.
Yeah. I suppose people are gonna say so. My name's James. So I'm basically the distillery brand ambassador for Teeling whiskey. Essentially to represent the distillery. So I'm in and out of the distillery every single day, Monday to Friday, usually Saturday and Sunday as well, if there's something going on. But I basically, on the tourism side of things, on the tours, on cocktails, and then also on the whiskies, obviously, when you work in a distillery, and about bringing that kind of distillery experience internationally. But yeah, I lived in Sweden for 2.5 years. So don't test me on my Swedish. I cannot understand it, but my pronunciation at this stage is absolutely woeful. What I've understood about Swedish as well is that every region in Swedish thinks that all of the other regions speak it incorrectly.
Yeah.
Which I've realised. So I lived in Lund, so I studied there, worked as a geologist, and worked in bars. And I suppose that's what kind of got me into... I was always into whiskey, but working in the whiskey bars in Sweden is a whole different kettle of fish. Having guys coming up to you asking, like, I want, just say, an Ardbeg cask number 22560. And you're like, yeah, it's really got me into whiskey. And then ultimately from that got me more into Irish whiskey. So decided to take the trip back home and start working in the Irish whiskey industry. So I'm in the Irish whiskey industry 5 years now, and I'm with Teeling's nearly 3 years. 3 years in May. So yeah.
And you have a brand new distillery.
Yeah. So Teeling, for people who don't know, Teeling whiskey, and I suppose we've come far from, we keep kind of giving this thing of who Teeling whiskey are, and obviously we've gone from very, very small to in 80 different countries globally at the moment. But we opened our distillery in 2015, so 5 years ago. We'll be celebrating our 6th birthday this year. It doesn't look like we may get a birthday party with people in the distillery this year. We didn't get to have one last year. But hopefully the 7th birthday we'll be able to have a big party in the distillery. But yeah, we're a relatively young distillery as buildings go. Yeah. But Teeling whiskey brand would go back to 2012. And then whiskey in the Teeling family, as in the Teeling family being associated with whiskey, goes kind of the furthest we can date it back would be 1782. So there's always been that kind of strong link with whiskey and the Teeling family.
Yeah, but they owned Cooley, I think. Yeah, the Teeling family.
Yes. So our company, so Teeling whiskey, would be owned by Jack and Stephen. So kind of unusual for the whiskey industry. Well, alcohol industry, we're actually family owned.
Yeah.
So owned by two brothers, Jack and Stephen, and they would have gotten their experience and kind of foot in the industry from their dad, John, who would have opened up Cooley Whiskey Distillery. And Cooley would have been renowned for some fantastic products and being a kind of independent driver of innovation. So that kind of, what you say, like entrepreneurial, kind of innovative kind of style of whiskey production kind of very much followed from John into Jack and Stephen. And John's still off making whiskey, doing his own thing, and Jack and Stephen are doing their thing. So a lot of whiskey in the family.
A real whiskey family, I would say. But
yeah, it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if the children are christened with whiskey at this stage. It's all they talk about.
But one thing I like is that the first two releases that actually was distilled at the new distillery are the single pot still and the black pits.
Yeah, I suppose on both of those, since I started working with Teelings, both of those products have come out, and that's been, for me, has just been incredible to be a part of. Like watching grain come into the distillery, hearing it being milled, watching it being lathered, fermented, distilled, and then ultimately aged and bottled, and then being able to get it into your hands and get it all over the world has been incredible. So we have 2 new products from the distillery at the moment. So we have the single pot still.
Yeah.
Obviously, single pot still. I think when we released it in Sweden, it sold out in like a week. The last release of single pot still. That would be the unmalted barley and malted barley, that kind of quintessential Dublin style, that Irish style of whiskey that we own, that is kind of indicative of Irish and Dublin whiskey. And then at the moment, which is actually coming up to Sweden on the 2nd, 3rd of March, don't judge me on those numbers, but it's Black Place.
Yeah.
And this is something that we've had in the back pocket for about, I think we gave out the first samples of this a year and a half ago, and it's been kind of like the worst kept secret for a long time. And actually finally get it out to people is incredible. And that's triple distilled peated malt.
Yeah, that's quite unusual. Triple distilled peated whiskey. And it's not all bourbon matured, right?
Yeah, so I suppose it comes down to like what we're trying to do in Teelings. It's like when we want to make whiskey and we know how to make whiskey, but we don't want to put out more of the same. So there's no point in making Islay peated malt.
No.
Because there's distilleries up there with hundreds of years of knowledge and experience who are very, very good at doing that, and it's not overdone. It's very, very local to Ireland. They're always going to have that quality to it. So we never wanted to make that style. We wanted to make something that represented us, and that goes to all of our whiskies. We'll always look to what's out there, but how can we put that kind of Teeling stamp over it? So that's where the triple distillation comes in, with triple distillation being inherently kind of Irish in style. And then also, out of our own curiosity, like, what's this going to do with the peat? We didn't want that big kind of like, bang, hit you in the head kind of peat. We wanted a more subtle, sit by the barbecue kind of peat, and I think that comes out. But not entirely bourbon cask matured, and that's kind of something that us at Teeling, we don't really release any, except for a few single casks, only bourbon matured. There's always another cask involved. So this is bourbon and soft turn. So and we're trying. What's really fascinating about it is it's not bourbon and then soft turn. They're 2 completely different maturation streams. The bourbon, about 3 casks of bourbon, 1 cask soft turn, blended together, married or vatted, depends on the malt terminology that you're using.
I think this is a wonderful peated whiskey.
Yeah, I'll have a try actually. For me, it's straight, like, the tasting notes for this are, when you think peated whiskey, you don't kind of think the tasting notes that you get from this. Like, for me, like, I love peated whiskey. I love the big, heavy, kind of, that medicinal, salty, kind of iodine nose. I love that. But that's more on the double distillation side of things. With the triple distillation, it really changes the peat to this lovely kind of barbecuey. I don't know, like, what do you guys think?
I think it's a peated whiskey with lots of other things happening besides the peat, and that's what I like about it. Because I personally can have a problem with heavily peated stuff, because it's only peat and not much else. But I think this is a very fruity character as well.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to definitely the Sauterne casks have an influence, and I suppose the Sauterne cask influence comes from our essentially our 24-year-old winning world's best single malt, which was a risk at the time, taking 21-year-old, very, very high quality, slightly peated bourbon matured malt. And people will attest to anybody who's lucky enough to have that old 21-year-old bottle, how good it was. And kind of testament to Alex and Jack just deciding to put it, and Stephen deciding to put it into kind of Sauterne casks, and the risk paid off. So continuing that onto the 28-year-old, it seemed like a no-brainer. Of we realized that peat and Sauterne, they just work very, very well with each other. And I don't know about you guys, but for me, and we're very, very strange. It took me a while to kind of get around it and really kind of get to the note. But there's a lot of tropical fruit in it. It's
exactly peach. It's a lot of peach for me.
Peach, that's an interesting one actually. Yeah, no, I kind of get more. I get the pineapple in it, but I get lots of that peach kind of mango, very, very fruity style, and that could come from the Sauterne. But we also we white wine yeast ferment, which creates a lot of fruitiness, and I would say fruitiness would be a big kind of across all of our whiskies would have this subtle kind of underlying fruitiness to it.
And what can you tell us about the same day as the Black Pits is released at Systembolaget, you will also release, what was it called? The Sommelier Selection 2.
Yeah, the Sommelier Selection. My girlfriend is French, so she gives out to me every single time she hears me online on one of these things pronouncing sommelier incorrectly, because I can't pronounce French. But the Sommelier Selection is this bottle here. I think I'm giving the first look of it there.
Yeah.
Quite striking label on it, and gives that kind of wine kind of. It just reminds me of wine on the label, but this whole series stems off the small batch, essentially. So, obviously, small batch being the first whiskey that we produced. You can take a wild guess about what size batch the small batch is done in. Some very small batches. It just gives us a lot more kind of control over the flavor. But before we put it into rum, so just our kind of flagship blend, aged in bourbon, before we put it into rum, we realized that we had a good base. So that's where the collaboration series came from. The plantation, the pineapple, the ginger beer, the Curo, all of those different collaborations. And after kind of playing around with many different casks, so like the likes of the kind of Revival and Renaissance, the Brabazon series, we had a lot of good quality, like fortified wines and dessert wines and flagship kind of typical wines as well. So we wanted to do a wine series. So the original one of the Sommelier Selection would have been the Chateau Margaux. This one is the Sauterne. So it's kind of interesting to see where the 24-year-old being in Sauterne, the Black Pits being in Sauterne, the Sommelier Selection being in Sauterne, not the Sauterne company, even though we just really like Sauterne casks. But it just comes down to our kind of approach that we want to see what single malt does with the Sauterne cask. So that's where the 24-year-old goes in. We want to see what peated does with the Sauterne, and that's where the Black Pits comes in. We want to see what the blend did with the Sauterne, and it's our own kind of interest in just kind of innovating and experimenting with different ideas, and it came out great. This would be about 12 months up to 2 years, so it's a number of different casks, 12 months up to 2 years in the Sauterne casks, and it's more fruity for me than the Black Pits. It has that. Wine lovers are really, really going to like it. Perhaps wine lovers who wouldn't go for a single malt, like the Renaissance or something like that, would want something a little bit easier, then the Sommelier Selection Sauterne would be for them.
I remember the first Sommelier Selection I liked a lot. I thought it was great.
I think I have it up here. I think that's that there. This one.
Yeah.
I think
Okay. Yes.
I like that one a lot.
Yeah, this one. The thing about the kind of sommelier selection is like, okay, how can we take a wine cask and also make it whiskey out of it, but also pay respects to the wine as well. So like, how can you borrow flavors from this cask and put it over ours so that it can be a Sauternes, but also a Teeling whiskey at the same time. And that's what I find really interesting about the sommelier series and the collaboration series. It's kind of borrowing flavors from different industries.
Yeah. What can you tell us about the Brabazon, or how you pronounce it?
Brabazon.
Brabazon.
Yeah.
It's released in April, I think.
Yeah, it's coming out April 13th, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
Alongside another whiskey. Am I allowed? Don't think I'm allowed to speak about that yet.
Okay.
But the Brabazon series, and it's not an international thing that only people outside of Ireland pronounce it wrong. It's an Irish thing as well. Irish people can't pronounce it as well. Okay. The Brabazon series is this here. This is the Carcavelos. Brabazon series was... I'm sad to see it go because this is the last installment in the series. As far as I'm aware, who knows, Jack and Stephen and Alex may decide to revive it in maybe a year or two, but as far as we've been told, it's the last of it. So this was kind of our journey through I like to think of it typical whiskey flavors. So you look at the revival series, we did like Pinot de Charente, we did Scotch, you look at the Renaissance series, and we did kind of Australian Shiraz and Madeira, more kind of different atypical whiskey flavors. The Brabazon kind of focused on your port and cherry, put in a Teeling way. So the Brabazon 1 being 6 different sherry casks, Brabazon 2 being 6 different port casks. So they were very, very successful. Brabazon 2, everyone forgets that picked up world's best Irish malt when the 24-year-old won world's best single malt. People always forget that, even us, because the 24-year-old won. But we had a good kind of standing with those. But from that, we kind of identified, okay, like which was our favorite cask. And Brabazon 3, that was the Pedro Jimenez. So we got those really, really old Solero stack casks. And that was kind of the representation of the best sherry cask that we liked in Series 1. The last series, so the Brabazon 4, is our favourite port cask, essentially, from the Brabazon 2. And this is a Carcavelos white port. So, white port, Carcavelos used to be a lot more prominent, a lot bigger, popular globally than it is today. And it just brings a lovely, lovely, fruity, robust, but also sweet and, for me, slightly nutty kind of undertones to the whiskey. I would say this is the cherry on the top of the Brabazon series. So again, typical Teeling fashion, starts off in bourbon, giving it a good, that kind of foundation and bedrock, and then 2 years in the Carcavelos white port casks.
Oh, cool. Sounds delicious.
Nice. It's a pity you didn't get the whiskies. I wish I could actually see what you think of it right now.
I will let you know. But, har du någon till fråga?
Nej. Det var trevligt att träffa dig i alla fall.
That was good. That was great to meet you guys as well. And hopefully let us know what you think of the whiskies when they arrive. Interested to see. Because I know the last one, your favourite was... I think you had the Brabazon as well, and your favourite... Brabazon 3, and your favourite was the Sommelier. I'll be interested to see if the Sauternes beats the Brabazon 4 this time.
Okay.
We'll let you know, James. And I hope to see you sometime, or maybe at the distillery or a fair in Sweden or something like that.
Yeah, when we can travel again. It seems like, what is it, nearly a year now of this? I think everybody's itching to... I have a feeling when things go back to normal, everyone's going to miss each other because people will go over to countries and everyone else will have gone to somewhere else. But yeah, hopefully get to go to whiskey fairs again, have you in the distillery, roll out the red carpet that hasn't been walked on for a long time. And it'd be good.
So, thank you for this. Maybe we'll do an interview again sometime in the future. Yeah, no, thanks very much, guys. And yeah.
Slanje.
Skål. Skål.
Skål.